Hello, everyone. Welcome. Shawn Thompson here, spiritual counselor and psychic medium, owner of Inner Healing. Thank you for joining me today. I am going to be talking about a very sensitive subject, a very powerful subject, and one that nobody really likes to talk about, but I think it's needed because I think at some point, when you lose a loved one, you really question your faith, you question your trust in God. And sometimes that's a really hard topic to talk about because you feel like you're a bad person or that you shouldn't feel that way or that you've lost your power source and how could you be angry at God? But at some point, when you lose someone, you become angry at God. It's a normal response. And I'm not talking about just the loss of a loved one. I'm talking about it could be a divorce. It could be the loss of a pet. It could be loss of job that you've had for 25 years. And frankly, it could piss you off and it could make you angry at God. So we're going to talk about that today. And I do just want to stress that I've been a counselor for over 20-something years. I have worked through some anger myself over the years. And all of this is normal. It's something that at some point you're going to go through and it's okay. What I do want to say though is as long as you don't stay in the place of being angry at God, you're going to be okay. If it's been months and years and you're still pissed off, I think it's time to have it come into Jesus, basically. Because you're really withholding a power source to help you through the grief and to help you come back to joy and happiness. And that's not what typical loss is there to do. It's more of a catalyst to help you grow. And with that, you do grow within your relationship with your higher power. And so today, I want to talk about 3 keys that will open the door back up to reestablishing your relationship with your higher source. So the first key is that you have to know that God is bigger than you and God is big enough to hold that anger that you have. Okay, he's big enough to hold that space for you. And you don't have to worry about that. So I want to use an example of like a parent-child relationship. So if you're a parent, and if you're not, think of it as if you have a pet. And you have to take something away from that child or that pet. And you don't explain to them why you're taking it away. You just know as the guardian of that child or pet that it just needs to be done. And you may share all the information as to why you're doing it, or you may not. And it's gonna have the kid throw a tantrum, right? Or the dog's gonna whine. And they don't understand why you're taking that particular thing away from them because you may not explained it. But they're still going to throw a fit, and they're going to be pissed at you, okay? I remember one time my daughter was so mad at me. She was standing in the hallway. She was 3 years old, and I took something away from her. And she was too young to understand why I did it, and she pulled her hand with her fingernails across the wall, and she just said, "I hate you." And I just gave the sign of the cross, and my grandma was right there, and she said, "Shawn, you shouldn't do that." I said, "The devil's in her, can't you see it?" And she's like, she just doesn't understand why you're doing that. And she was mad at me. She said she hated me. But I knew as a parent that she didn't mean that. She was mad because I took something away from her. She wouldn't have understood why I took it away from her. But I was big enough to hold that space for her as my daughter, for her to be mad at me. It wasn't going to ruin me. I wasn't going to devastate her or make her feel bad because she was angry at me. So the first key is understanding that God is big enough to hold the space for you when you're angry. That's important to know. The second key that I want to share with you is that God is not a punishing or vengeful God. a lot of times in religion, we are taught that we're sinners, or that if we don't act right or do good deeds, that we're not going to get into the pearly gates. And so we're taught that we're separate from God, and that if we don't do right, we're going to get punished by God. We're taught this in almost every religion, in school, through our family mindsets and beliefs. And so we grow up fearing that if we get mad at God, one, that's bad, and two, that God will do things to us, like take people we love, get us fired from a job, create a divorce or whatever, if we don't follow the rules, and that's so untrue. And so I want to use the example of divorce, and going back to that parent-child relationship. Imagine you're married and you have to go through a divorce because you grow apart from your spouse, or you're just in a different direction, or something bad happens within the marriage and you just realize that it's time. Everything has its exit point, right? Whether it's life and death, whether it's divorce, whether it's relationship, whether you move on from a job. Everything has its exit point. And if we take the exit point personal, we get pissed, and we want to blame somebody. And it's not always like that. So in a divorce situation, if the child felt as though they did something wrong and that caused the divorce, that could make the child feel like daddy did something bad to mommy and got a divorce, or mommy didn't love us anymore and left us. And that's just not true. But we are taught to blame authority or a God source for something bad that happens, because ultimately we're taught that God can be vengeful, or if we're not good, then we'll get punished by being withheld into heaven. So the child would experience the divorce, would blame and be angry and think maybe that they did something wrong to cause that. And you and I both know that that's not true. So when you have the loss of a loved one and you want to blame God and say, why did you take this loved one from me? Why did you punish me? Why did you make my life turn into a mess by taking my 1-month-old daughter from me? She hadn't even had a life. God is not punishing or vengeful. We all have our exit points. And if you understand the bigger picture of life and the lessons that we're here to learn, and everything is connected, you will understand that we're not separate from God. We're not separate from our loved ones. And at some point we'll be reunited. But death is not ever a purposeful event that God did to you or did to the situation. It's really more complex and bigger than that. And you have to trust that God is not that way. Now, the third key, which I think is really important, is about your ability to forgive. So I want to talk about forgiveness on a different level. Of course, one part of it is that you have to work on forgiving yourself for anything that you did or didn't do, anything that you think somebody else did or didn't do to you. And you have to be able to release that, because that's not what our loved ones want, for us to sit in guilt or shame or worry or regret. The other part of forgiveness that most of us know about is having to forgive the situation. Now, this is a lot harder when a loved one has been murdered or suicide or overdose, and you have to learn to forgive the situation. And that does include everybody within the situation, and that can take a little bit longer. Forgiving yourself and forgiving other people for something they did as a part of the loss is extremely hard. And it's something that as a human being we struggle with, and sometimes people don't ever forgive the situation, especially like a murder or abuse. So when you get to this point, here's the key here. When you get to this point, forgive means you break that word in two. Forgive. So I was taught that it's for giving it up to God. You give it up to a higher source to help you when the situation and the pain is unbearable, when you can't possibly fathom being able to comprehend forgiving a person, or you're in such guilt, maybe because you had a loved one commit suicide and they reached out to you and you didn't follow through on the call. So you're having to forgive yourself over that. When the pain becomes so bearable and you just can't get there yet, I want you to think about and shift your perspective about forgiveness and breaking it down into those two words and actually giving it up to God to hold that for you, because God's big enough for that. So let me recap the 3 keys. The first one is to realize that God is big enough to hold the space for you to be angry. Secondly, God is not punishing or vengeful. It's a lot bigger and complicated than you realize, and you have to trust that. And third, if it's too unbearable to deal with, give it up to God and let Him hold the space for you until you're there. So I want you to really reflect on what I talked about today, because I don't know where else you'd really talk about it. And I hope that this was enlightening and inspiring for you to reopen that door and establish that relationship for that inner strength. So I really appreciate you watching today.